Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite farmer housewives implement to use during the summertime. When I became a volunteer here, I walked in one day. I had been volunteering quite regularly, and I walked in and I said, "Oh, you've got a Conservo!" And everybody who was here looked at me and said, "Yeah, what is a Conservo?" I said, "Let me tell you. I grew up with my mother and father using a Conservo. We were a family of 6. And so during the 1930s and the 40s, food was sometimes scarce and it was not to be wasted. And they have farm backgrounds, so they knew that there was plenty of food available in season. But of course, you've got food in season and you can't go down to the grocery store and buy a can of tomatoes, not in the 1920s and 30s. So you had to provide for yourself. And this is the little machine that provided for my family when I was a child. When tomatoes came into season, my folks would go to somebody they knew or to farmer's market and buy a bushel of tomatoes and can them like this. And in order to can tomatoes, my mother and I, when I finally got old enough and could be trusted with boiling water, would retreat to the basement. And that was nice because it was like air conditioned. Although not, it was natural air conditioning because it was much cooler down there. And we had a little hot plate and we put on a kettle of water, get it boiling. I had a plastic basket and I would dip the tomatoes into the boiling water so that the peel would come off easily. Walk them over to the sink. My mother would then take over and peel them, slip the peel off, and chop them the way she wanted them. Put them in cans and put them in this magic machine, the Conservo. Now the Conservo was put on the stove. As soon as she had a few quarts ready to go in, she would start to heat it. The Conservo is made in Toledo, Ohio by the Schwarzbach Company. And it was one of their better selling items. It really made their business. And it's a tin box with 2 shelves mounted on a copper reservoir. And you could fill the reservoir through the hole in the top, or take it to the sink, or bring a pitcher over to it. And this is an escape valve for the steam. Anyway, you set it on the stove and get it hot, and of course with the doors closed. And when you were ready, you loaded it up. I always thought it was 12 cans that would go, 6 on each, but they say 14. And I do remember you could sort of squeeze a 7th can on each of the racks. And then there is this is a copy of the manual, and it'll be here at the farm. You can read on it. You can go out on the side porch, sit on the swing, read all about it, and then you'll know how to can peaches, tomatoes, green beans, mixed vegetable soup. The other thing that is really nice about this manual is fabulous. You must read it. A housewife would be tired after canning all day. So perhaps on the last set, she would have cans to process, and on the bottom, she'd put some corn, some baked potatoes, maybe a meatloaf, and her meal for dinner would be prepared at the same time. And so that would save her some time at the end of the day. Making all of those quarts of vegetables and fruit. Oh, here's a better picture. Oh, if you're having a wedding feast at your house, you can make a large meal in the Conservo, dedicate the whole thing, and it's a steaming process. You would have to brown the meat first and then put it in to steam cook it. It would be like pressure cookers, and the Schwarzbach company made those also. A wonderful person had to have written this manual, and you really must read it. My favorite testimonial is on page 2, how I take care of a whole hog with my Conservo. And I do remember during World War II, when my grandfather would butcher a hog, my folks would bring back some of the meat because meat was rationed, and they would can it. And they'd put it way up on the top shelf. They only used it in emergencies because my brothers and I were not fond. The meat became very bland, and the texture was sort of mushy, actually. Now, the end of the Conservo story is, my husband loved cherry jam and cherry pie. So every year we'd go cherry picking before the 4th of July. And I said, I wish I had a Conservo like my mom had when I was a kid. We lived in Toledo, Ohio, and Northwest Ohio was primarily where these Conservos were used. And I said, if I could find a Conservo, that'd really save time. So I kept watching the want ads in the Toledo Blade, and son of a gun, one day there was an ad for a Conservo. And I called the woman, and she said, oh, yes. I said, what do you want for it? I think it was $20. I said, oh, we'll be over. And so we went, and it was in perfect condition. It actually had the manual. Silly me, I gave it away with the Conservo, and I don't even know where it went. But I used that in the late 60s and early 70s in my modern kitchen, and I did cherries, peaches, pears, and applesauce. And those peaches, steamed in the Conservo, tasted like honey. And I could control the number of sugar, or amount of sugar that I added, which was not very much because they were so sweet by themselves. So I have a true fondness for this little machine. It's wonderful. That's the Conservo.